So a little bit about the two authors today. Nadia Hashimi is her book is The Sky Under Her Feet, and it brings together two unlikely characters, Jason and Max, together in a crazy adventure in New York City. This nuanced story really examines the complex issues of immigration and childhood epilepsy and looks at two teenagers who are really working together. Kate Beasley's book, Gertie's Great Leap into Greatness, I got it backwards, is the story. It's full of life lessons and interesting stories of Gertie, who lives in a small town and her mom leaves. So she attempts to show her mom what she's going to miss and really learns some life lessons and tackles some mean girls and learns the importance of being yourself. These are two important topics that we really want to explore, and we are really excited to have Nadia and Kate today. So I'm going to sit down and let them take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hello. So I'm really excited to be here. I'll just tell you that I am local. I live about 15 minutes away from me, from here, and I didn't have to travel very far. But this is always a great place for me to come. But I know you had to travel quite a bit.
Right. I am from Georgia, so I live in Claxton, Georgia. It's a town that's an hour west of Savannah. So I'm here in Maryland for the first time.
Welcome.
Loving it. And I love the weather. I like the rain. I find it soothing. So no complaints from me. And everybody's been really welcoming. So glad to be here.
Well, if you find the rain soothing, then you should be completely relaxed because we've been
totally
rained
zen
out all week. Yeah, so we're absolute zen over here. We thought, we chatted a little bit beforehand, and we thought that instead of each of us speaking, that we could actually have this as more of a conversation between the two of us, and then shortly we'll open it up to questions so that you all can be part of the conversation as well. So we'll hope to make it engaging, and you know, keep in mind that we do want to talk about these characters. We want to talk about the writing process, so we'll be open to any and all questions.
We love questions. So, Nadia, I just read your book, The Sky Under Her Feet, and it was brilliant. And one thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that you give such a balanced, nuanced view of the experience of an undocumented immigrant. So Jason's mom reveals to him that she is in the U.S. without documents, and he didn't know this. And suddenly their lives are filled with this sense of isolation and fear, and there's so many different emotions that I think I had never seen portrayed in a book before. And I wondered, how important is it to you to get that experience just right? Because it was so detailed.
So for me, you know, when I take a look at what I want to write about, I think about what are the issues that are pressing in our communities or in our world. And immigration is one of them right now, where people are thinking about what does it mean to be documented? What does it mean to be undocumented? How are we going to handle this situation with humanity, but still move forward? And especially when I'm tackling these kinds of questions with children, my goal is not to get in there and be, you know, where I believe that this is exactly what we need to do and this is my solution set, but rather to propose some kind of framework for a conversation so that kids can start to think about these questions and come up with some of their own solutions or where they stand on these issues. Because for a lot of these issues, there's really no black or white answer. And in these years, for young people, I really want them to be thinking. So I used what I've seen growing up. My own family comes from, we're an immigrant family, so all different kinds of travels and journeys to come to the United States or to go to other countries, either as refugees or accepted or some undocumented. But understanding that those journeys are multifaceted and nuanced in themselves.
Okay. So your parents were from Afghanistan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I felt like you did the same with the question of, in this book, Gertie's Leap to Greatness is an amazing story. It's really, it takes a look at, you get to know Gertie in a really special way. Gertie is her own person, and I love certain passages in there where you talk about, and there's one specific line in the beginning, actually there's a paragraph where you said, Gertie had brown hair, which she wore in a ponytail that stuck straight out of the top of her head, which encouraged blood flow to her brain, which made her have lots of ideas. She also had a biggish nose and a pointy chin. She had freckles on her face, and she had elbows halfway down her arms. Absolutely brilliant, right? As always, she looked exactly like herself. And so there's something about people just being themselves, being comfortable in their own skin, and that, all these pieces being part of our identity. And this Gertie, who we get to know in such a beautiful way, she, through her journey, and I don't want to give too much away, but she takes a look at this question of industry. So her father works on an oil rig, versus there's a movement in school that looks more about the environment and how do we protect our environment, and oil rigs are a bad thing. And yet Gertie has to navigate this conversation knowing that her father works on an oil rig and that there are benefits, there are uses for oil realistically. But yes, we do need to protect our environment. And so I feel like you also used a little nuanced view in there.
I think whenever you're writing, you put yourself into every single character's point of view, and you have to, in order to write the story, you have to think, okay, what would this character think at this point? And for me, that's like the best part of writing, because it makes you empathize and think in ways, it makes me stretch myself. So when I'm not writing, I think I kind of get in my rut and I just, see the same things I see every day. But when I'm having to think about different point of views, that's when I really start to understand the different sides of an argument. So I love that aspect of writing.
I think that's what makes readers better people too. It's because you put yourself in another character's shoes as you go through their journey, and that empathy helps us all be better people. And I think with young people, that's one of the big benefits of reading books, is that they start to expand, their minds become even more elastic, and they can start to feel what it is like to be another kind of person.
Right. So I know our panel's called Facing Challenges, and both of our books deal with like some pretty heavy stuff. So Gertie's mom abandoned her, and Jason's living with this constant fear. And so I think they're very serious, but I really enjoyed your book. Like, it was a fun read in addition to being a very serious read. And I know, to make Gertie a fun read as well. So I tried to infuse a lot of humor in there. And I was wondering if it was conscious for you, because your book is incredibly fun. The character Max, Jason makes a friend named Max, and she is such a firecracker. And I wondered if you consciously were making the book light in some ways or bringing in hope and joy.
I think for me, there was no other way to do it for a children's book, because if you look at children, and I use my background as a pediatrician to inform me, and when I write about kids, I write about them from the perspective, not just as a mom, but as a pediatrician too. And so I've seen kids in some really tough situations, either physically or emotionally or whatever it may be. But no matter what's going on in the life of children, those children find a way to make you smile, to bring some kind of sunshine, to find ways to just bring in the lightness to any moment. And that's what I find really powerful. That's what draws me to children in general and doing any kind of work with children. And so for me, even writing a story about an issue that is as heartbreaking as an undocumented family dealing with issues of separation, even in those kinds of stories, there will be moments of lightness, because that's what children insist on.
I agree.
Yeah. And you did the same thing. Gertie is dealing with a mom, as you said, who abandoned her, but she still finds her spunk. She still finds ways to inspire her friends around her. Sometimes they even worry, how far are you going to go, Gertie? And they worry about what she's going to do next. And I was a little bit worried about Gertie too.
Yeah, Gertie makes some bad choices.
But Gertie makes bold choices. Gertie is a risk taker. And I think that's what is so inspiring to read about her, is that she is insistent on taking control of her situation and not just being a silent partner in this journey, but rather she's going to dictate the way she's going. So what was your inspiration for Gertie and that bold and fiery spirit?
So Gertie is, she's basically the fifth grader I wish I had been. She is so determined and she never gives up. And I was not nearly as bold as she was. And so I think she's the kind of the person I want to still grow up to be. I want to be this risk taker. And it makes her really fun to write about. So it is fun to write about a character who is going to make these choices and get into a load of trouble. And I love to read about that kind of kid.
So this brings to mind one question I do have to ask, because this is something that Gertie does. Have you ever resuscitated a bullfrog?
Gertie resuscitates the bullfrog. She does. She uses a turkey baster.
I have one of those.
I have not done that personally. I grew up with a friend who tells me that she did. So when we were about 10 years old, I went to her house one day and she had a frog and showed it to me and said she'd brought it back to life. So I don't know if I believe her, but it was a good story and I had to recycle it in my work.
Okay, so note to everyone, go home and put your turkey baster into your first aid kit, back into the medicine cabinet where it belongs. Right?
Useful.
You know, there's a couple other, there were so many similarities, I almost felt like, just in the journeys of these two, of the characters from both of these books, that one thing that I mentioned to Kate on the phone was I almost wish that my characters could meet hers and have a little interaction, have like a play date for our characters. But those are some of the personality traits. Like, how do you start to pick up the different personalities? You've got one, Gertie's best friend, Jean, who kids tease her and they call her Genius. And she liked the nickname so much that she started writing it at the top of her assignments. Now, to me, this seems like a brilliant way to turn teasing into something that Jean then owns and turns around and says, you know what, I am a genius. So
Yeah.
how do you find these different personalities?
Jean's pretty sassy. She does take ownership of it. So really, all of my stories start with my characters. I come up with this cast of friends and I have to really want to write about them. So I'll audition sort of all of these different characters and some of them don't make the cut. And with these, a lot of it's based on people I know. So I'll take elements of personalities and put them into my work. And some of it's kind of wish fulfillment. Like I do wish I had been Gertie. And I people watch. I steal from real life all the time. So I'm constantly watching people and listening to them speak. And I'm writing in my notebook. So I'm stealing from really awesome people. What about you? What's your process?
Actually, so whenever people say that they people watch, I appreciate that because that's what I do too. I feel like I'm a spy, whether I'm in a coffee shop or in an airport, or I just watch people's behaviors. Sometimes it's such slight things, but it's just either body mechanics, the way someone might fold their arms, or just nervous habits that they might have, because each of those little tiny pieces really adds layers to an individual, and then you start to understand who they are as a whole.
I steal dialogue from kids all the time because they're loud talkers usually when they're trying to make themselves heard. And I hear it and I say, oh, that's good. I'm using that.
I know. Well, don't tell two of the people who are sitting in the audience, but I've stolen some of their dialogue too. Sorry, guys.
So you said our books had like a lot of similarities, and they really do. And one thing that I really loved about your book, so the question of bravery comes up a lot in your book. So Jason is having to be brave because he's been put in this situation. And I really think Gertie's having to be brave as well. And these are kids who, there's a scene in your book that's just so perfect. Jason and Max are at the zoo and they're thinking about bravery and talking about it and how it's not all good. I mean, we think of bravery as, oh, that's a wonderful quality, and it is. But if you're having to be brave, it's because something's gone wrong. And in this scene, they sort of just get tired. You know, they've been brave so long that they're sort of fed up with it. And I just thought that's absolutely true. And is it okay for us to just sometimes get tired? What do you think?
I think it is. You know, for Jason and Max, I do actually put them through quite a bit in this book.
You're mean to your characters.
I am. You know, I really challenge them. But, you know, it's out of that kind of a challenging and harrowing situation that people define themselves, that people become heroes. And so, you know, in the face of adversity, in the face of like terrible things going on, wherever you look around the world, as bad as things get, that's where heroes are born. That's where heroines are born. And that's what Jason and Max become. But yes, I would imagine even for people who are so brave that there's fatigue that comes in there. And I think one thing is understanding who we are in the context of the world. And that was something that I wanted to chat with you about as well is, you know, other kids might look at someone else and say, wow, you know, Max is so brave. She's just brave. She never seems to get tired. Nothing bothers her. She's absolutely like unflappable. That's Max. But for Max herself, maybe that's not the case. You know, maybe she has moments where people don't necessarily see that she is tired. It can get to her and she can get sad. And those are all the dimensions of being people. And in your book, there is a character who has the father who has contacts with Hollywood, and she's got the fancy birthday party. And so there's this imagination created that her life is absolutely perfect. And so the concept of, the grass being greener on the other side is something that also plays through in that character. But then they realize, she actually does face some challenges. She does have things to worry about, but you wouldn't know it until you got close enough to her to know that part of her being as well. So I thought you did a nice job of portraying that.
Well, thank you. I think that's one of the powerful parts of books, because I know I do it in real life. I look at people and only see the good things. I only see how everything's going great for them. And I really need to remind myself, and books help me do that everybody has a backstory and everybody has more going on. So for me, that is what books do, one of the many things they do for me. So. Mm-hmm.
And I think these days, especially with social media, nobody posts their terrible moments on Facebook, right? Everyone's posting like the absolutely most perfect dish of food and perfect coffee with the latte foam just right. Mm-hmm. But nobody posts the moment where, you're covered with like spaghetti sauce and all of that kind of good stuff too. So there's almost this impression of like everyone else's life seems perfect and mine isn't. But I think stories are a powerful way of getting to know that, there are moments of imperfection in everybody's life. We don't know each other's struggles. But conversation can help us get there.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought all that up, because now I realize why I like that scene in your book so much. It's because we get to see the cracks in a person, and that's important.
Yes. Yeah. At some point, all of us are going to be covered in spaghetti sauce. Like, It's going to happen, right?
So I want to bring something up. So you have a ton of hats. Like, I was reading your bio, and you're a pediatrician, and you're a mom, and you're a writer, and it's just... You do so much. And my first thought when I read all that was like, I bet she has a ton to write about. Like, I was at a panel earlier today, and that came up. Like, your real life is such a source of material for all of your work. And do you find that to be true?
It definitely is. And that's, one of the reasons that this story is in New York City, and it's based on, Max being a child who's dealing with epilepsy. So I did my pediatric training at NYU Hospital in New York City, and that was the backdrop for my medical training, for my pediatric training. And I met so many children who were diagnosed with epilepsy and who were undergoing all different kinds of treatments. And that's where I saw kids who really, some of them took ownership and said, this is not going to be a disease or an illness or a diagnosis that controls me or dictates how my life is going to go, but rather I'm going to be who I am, and then this is something that I have to manage on the side. And that really inspired this particular character, being able to talk about that. And so whether it's epilepsy or any other kind of disorder, it's knowing that there's room for those kids to own their lives as well.
So my other thought with that was, how do you balance it all? When do you write? Like, when do you actually sit down and do the writing?
When there's time.
Okay.
So it really depends on what's happening in my life. I started writing when I was working in an emergency room. So if I was doing a shift, I was doing a shift. But on days that I wasn't working a shift in the emergency room, then I could be home and I would write. 2 of my kids are in school right now. The other 2 are going to like a Montessori school. They're younger. So whenever I find the time, then I write. Sometimes it happens in the evening, sometimes in the day, but it's all about
squeezing it in.
Squeezing it in.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm always selfishly looking for tips. When do you write? When should I be writing?
Whenever you can. And I think we wanted to open it up definitely and include some questions. So any questions from the audience? Yes.
I have a question. When did you guys decide you wanted to be a children's author? And about how long did it take you from the time you wrote the book to the time it got published? Like, how long does it take to write a book and get it published?
So I did my undergrad degree in creative writing, and most of what I wrote was for adults, adult literary fiction. And I decided I wanted to go to grad school because I didn't know what to do with my writing degree. So I thought, grad school, that's what you do with your writing degree. And it came time to apply to all the schools. And they make you write this essay of, what were your favorite books? They want to know what kind of books you like. And I realized that all the books I was writing about were children's books. So it was Beverly Cleary, and it was Harriet the Spy, and Louis Sachar's Holes. And that was a big indicator to me that maybe I should be writing for children and applying to children's writing programs. So that's when I knew. And I wrote Gertie's Leap to Greatness in grad school. It was my thesis. And after that, I revised it for a year. And after it finally sold, it was 2 years before it came out. So that was my journey.
Yeah, mine's a little bit different. I was writing books for adults, and one of my books did particularly well with book clubs and groups of women. And so my agent actually called me one day, and she was like, I think you should write this for young girls to read. And that was my first children's book. And, at first, that story, I put my characters in this book through a lot, but in my adult books, like, it's a whole other level of drama going on. And I said, Helen, I can't imagine writing that story for children. How could you possibly? And she said to me in this, she has a beautiful English accent, a British accent, and she said, you'll figure it out. And then she hung up the phone on me. So I had to figure it out. But then it dawned on me, I'm a pediatrician. I have children of my own. Why would I not think to write books for children? And I know how much children are affected by these same questions. So I set off to kind of write almost like a mother-daughter read. We pitched it as an idea to the children's side of my publishing company, HarperCollins. And they picked it up and gave me a contract for 2 books, actually. So one, I knew what I was going to write, and the other one, I was just like, no, I have to figure this out. So it's a little bit of a different journey, but it's incredible to be able to get into classrooms and talk to young people. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Favorite children's books. I have so many. So I said I'm a Beverly Cleary fan, Harriet the Spy. So I like all the classics. I just read The Watsons Go to Birmingham for the first time by Christopher Paul Curtis. And it is amazing. The story itself is amazing. And his writing is, I wish I had written it. It's just that perfect. So I love a ton. Of course, I'm a Harry Potter fan and a Percy Jackson fan. What about you?
I would echo a lot of the classics as well. So, Beverly Cleary, Madeline L'Engle. I think I read all of the Boxcar Children and the Nancy Drew. I grew up on all of those. And then some of the more recent stuff. Before I set off actually to write a children's book, I had to kind of get my brain into that mode. I hadn't read children's books in quite some time. And so I read Wonder, which I thought was really, really amazing. And then, let's see, what was the last one? I can't remember what I've read after that. But now I get to explore some of these with my children as well. So we're starting to get into the Harry Potter. And I'm really excited, actually, to start reading Percy Jackson.
They're so good.
Yes. There's a question here, too.
So my family plays a big role. So my sister is an author. She wrote Circus Mirandus. Her name is Cassie Beasley. And she and I edit each other's work. So she reads every draft of my books and helps me make them better. And I critique her work as well. So we are very involved with each other's work. And our parents are really big readers. They're not big writers, but they're big readers and big promoters. So my dad actually, he carries around copies of our books in his truck and sells them to people. So my family is very involved, and my parents read all of my books before they come out, and yeah, I couldn't do it without them. I have a good support system.
Your dad sounds like my dad. My mom called me once she was texting me from Europe. They were there visiting family, and she said, every person your dad saw reading a book on a train, he went and talked to. And was like, oh, you read books? But in my family, I think my husband's been really instrumental in helping me kind of bounce story ideas off. He's really good at helping me with plot direction. I almost stick to reality a bit too much, and then he helps me kind of, spread my wings a little bit and imagine the possibilities. Other than that, my parents have been real supporters too, and like I said, my dad kind of selling my books. But the real inspiration for a lot of my stories comes from things that are within the family. So now a lot of family events, people turn around to me if something happens or if they happen to say something, and they turn around and be like, please don't put this in a book.
They'll forget, though. You can use it, and they'll forget they said that.
Just change the name.
My question actually was about the names. You have interesting names in the book, particularly Gertie, and Jason kind of did it, but Max. So what was your inspiration around picking the names? You use them over and over. So
Do you want to answer this one first? Because Jason is a very interesting name.
Jason sounds like a very ordinary name, but the reason that he's named Jason is sort of extraordinary, which I don't think I'm going to give it away.
Okay.
I think I'm going to leave that as a little bit of a mystery. But his name is Jason D. And there was just something that kind of occurred to me that I thought would be cool, and that's why I made his name Jason D. And that mystery kind of like unravels a little bit of why exactly that is his name. For Max, you know, I wanted, the truth is that I wanted to pair him up with someone, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be a young boy or a young girl that he was going to go on this adventure with. And so I played around with who that would be. And so Max isn't necessarily, I mean, she is a girl, but her gender has nothing to do with what she does, what she's able to do, and their friendship. It's just who she is. And so I wanted a name that that wouldn't imply something about a girl that's too flowery or too delicate. I wanted a bold character, and I feel like sometimes girls who have those boys' names, you can go in either direction with what kind of personality they have. So it's almost like that name kind of dictating personality too.
I spend a really long time coming up with names, and I'm kind of persnickety about it. I never want a name that's of a person I know, because I don't want them to think I've written about them, especially if the character turns out to be not nice, and I don't want anybody to be too close to the story. And I actually take out like the baby name book, and I'll just go through and keep trying on different names. So I want like old-fashioned names. And that's actually another part my family gets involved with. They'll find unique names for me, and they'll send them to me, text them to me, and call them in. So I have a list going on my phone of unique names. Apparently the cemetery is a great place to get odd names. So I just have to try them out over and over until they all feel right. The question is, how old were we when we wrote our first book? Let me do some quick math. I started it when I was 21, and I think I finished it when I was 24.
I think I was 32 when I wrote my first book, if you don't count the one I did in second grade, which never went anywhere, but meant a lot to me. Okay.
Yes, I have to say that too. That's the first one that was published. There were books before that were not. Do we have any more questions?
Well, I have one more question. What's next? Then we've got Lions and Liars that's coming out soon, right?
Oh,
Can
yes.
you tell us about that?
I have a second book. It is called Lions and Liars, and it's illustrated by Dan Santat, who was here earlier today. And yes, it's about a boy named Frederick Fredrickson who winds up at a camp for troublesome boys, and he decides it's a good idea to pretend he's the worst boy there. Oops. And it's not a good idea, and there's escaped zoo animals and hurricanes, and it was really fun. So it comes out in June, and I actually have 15 galleys here to give away today at my signing, so I'm excited about that.
It sounds like an exciting read. I'm looking forward to it.
And I'm working on my next book, which I'm calling Book 3, which is a great title, and I don't know what it's about yet, so it'll be a surprise. What about you? What are you working on these days?
So I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from the writing for right now, but I do have a plan for a third children's book, and that one is really inspired by, I was in northern Italy doing some book talks there last summer, and the scenery there is just beautiful, but it's a part of Italy that borders Germany, and so there's a lot of history there. A period of war happened there, the border moved, and so the struggle that could have happened in a place that is so picturesque right now, I just imagined like on these hills with these vineyards and these farmhouses up on these hills. Imagine what this was like for a child to live here at a time where it wasn't this beautiful, where it was sort of, darkened by a really troubling situation going on.
I really want to go to Italy now, and I'm wondering if I could set a book there and maybe they would invite me.
Actually,
plan?
I think I really just want to write a book about there so I can go back and pretend to do research.
Yes. You have to do research. Do you do a lot of research when you're writing?
So research is a dangerous thing with books because it's so important For me, it's also a lot of fun to dig in and do research, whether it's like, I mean, down to the science of like, you know, if I create a story that's set in, you know, this part of a certain country, I want to know exactly what kinds of trees will grow there so that I'm not being inaccurate, because you will get an email from someone if you mess that up, right? But there's also there has to be a limit to it, because you can get lost in research and then never get any writing done. So for me, it's always striking that balance of making sure that I hit enough research, but not too much research.
Yes.
I did it from memory. I mean, I'd been there for years, so I was very familiar. But even having been familiar, I still wanted to make sure that I kept. So I always have a notebook for each story, and that notebook is sort of my work session in there. So I have, you know, certain references in there. So the New York City subway map, for example, was like on page 1. And then I had my diagram of like their specific route. They went up the street, so got onto the station here, you know, got off here. But making sure that I would, and then Google Earth is amazing, because you can actually zoom in and see like, okay, at this intersection, because I don't have a memory of exactly every single intersection in New York City, but zooming in and knowing, okay, this statue is right here, it's at this intersection, you would see it coming across this way, and being able to incorporate all of that. My publisher is also in New York City, so there were a couple of places where they were like, no, Nadia, remember, it's a little bit, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. So they had some fact checking done. Yeah.
I love research. It's my favorite part. And you're right. It really is like a black hole. You just get into it and you never leave.
Yeah.
I always say I'm researching with food. So if my character's eating, I'll go eat that meal. So I make them eat really good food that I like.
You have a question? What's my favorite book that I wrote? So, you know, I get this question a lot. And what I always tell people is, like, it's so hard to pick a favorite. It's almost like saying, you know, which is your favorite of your children. I would never do that, okay? But there's just something unique about every single book. There's, you know, the book that came out first that you know, I've connected with certain people in the community around that, certain book clubs that I've been able to engage with. And there's the book that talks about, one of my adult books talks about the refugee crisis in Europe. And that one has inspired at least a few people to find ways to become humanitarian volunteers. So whether they're medical professionals who have gone over to Greece to help out, or people who, you know, one woman in Texas says she was joining Catholic Charities to help out with some resettlement efforts. That's really powerful to me too. So each one of my stories has found a way to connect with people, to inspire them to do something, or to have a conversation with someone that they love. That's really powerful, and so they each mean something different to me.
I think that's a good answer, because, you know, you do have a different feeling for the first book. It's special because it's the first one, but my first one was really hard to write. You know, some books are just a challenge, and then my second was more enjoyable for me to write, but I like them both. So, yeah, you can't pick one. It's
funny,
wrong to pick one.
It's hard to pick one. It's almost the opposite for me. The first one was kind of easier because I'm like, okay, I think I know where I'm going with this.
I know, it's pulling teeth.
Oh, really? Because then the second one, I was like, but now what?
Can see that. So you have children.
I do.
What do they think of you being an author? They're here today, 2 of them.
I mean, I don't want to speak for them. You guys think it's, do you like me being an author or no? Kind of. So the answer is kind of. You know, it's funny. They're a little bit young to read my books. Mm-hmm. So, but we started one of them. Actually, we started The Sky at Our Feet together, and we read it at bedtime for like a couple of nights. And by the second night, we had to abandon because it was a bit emotional, and so it didn't really go as well as I was thinking. I said, okay, I think we need to be a couple years older to do this together. But I think it's cool to be able to do this with them. They are a lot of the inspiration for me, but then they also get to enjoy it with me, and they are readers in a different way. They get to see some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, too. You had a question as well. For children's or for anything? Do you want to talk about your last good read? Or what you're reading now?
Well, I just said The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, so that was a very good read. What have I been reading lately? I just draw a big blank.
That always
When
happens
you
to
said
me.
that, my brain fell out of my head. Do you know what you've been reading?
I just finished The Guest Room, Chris Bojalian, and which was really good. Not recommended for children, but very, very good. What else has been really good? This is so hard. Whenever someone asks this question, it's like a white curtain goes down.
The
But-
thing I just finished was Hiroshima, I think it's by John Hershey. So it's a nonfiction. Very interesting. Very interesting. It's about 6 survivors of Hiroshima bombing. Not a light read.
Yeah. And well, the only thing on my mind is Gertie's Leap to Greatness, because I actually read that in less than a day, and I like tore through it. But once you start, it's such a page turner that it's actually Gertie's Leap to Greatness that I read. Yeah. Not because it was just assigned reading, but it was really, really enjoyable. So it's a good one. What are you guys reading? Oh. Okay. Marie, you had a question?
Oh, my other question for you, for both of you. There's lots of lessons in both of the books. What's the most important? Like, if you had to pick one lesson that you wanted the audience or kids that are reading it to learn, what would that be?
So the most important life lesson, I usually don't think about that when I'm going into the story, but I knew from the beginning of Gertie's Leap to Greatness that Gertie is this girl who's never failed before. She always gets what she wants, and I kind of knew she was not going to get exactly what she wanted, and I was glad of that, because I know that, in life you don't always get what you want, even if you work your hardest. I think we have that kind of mantra that if you work really hard, all your dreams will come true. And then, you become an adult and you realize that that's not always the case. So I wanted her to realize that, and realize that afterwards life goes on and you have new dreams. So
For me, I think it's really empathy. Just making sure that empathy is always there, understanding that another person might be going through something that's bigger than you can imagine. Or even if it's small, it might feel really big to them, and that in every interaction we just take a breath, think about what they might be going through that might be unknown to us, and then move forward. Yeah. You had a question too?
I was just going to ask about your writing process. Do you outline? Do you just brainstorm?
So the question is about writing process. Do we outline? Do we brainstorm? I do a little bit different every day. I'm not a very consistent writer. So with Gertie's Leap to Greatness, I did not outline. I just woke up every morning and thought, okay, what does Gertie do today? And with my second book, I did outline. So I used a very sketchy outline. It was like 3 pages long, and I stuck to it and wrote it through, and it was a lot more pain-free. So I'm going to try that again, that outlining thing.
Yeah, an outline, I think, is the same as research, where if you spend too much time outlining, it can work against you. I do make an outline, and I've gotten to the point where my outline is now like on an Excel spreadsheet. So I have, chapter 1, this is what happens. Chapter 2, this is what happens. Because then it helps me go back and figure out, okay, if something needs to change, what else is going to change? It's like I can physically see it. But if you outline too heavily, you lose the organic flow of a story. And what I found is sometimes as you're writing a story, something just happens. And all of a sudden, things have to change course. And so if you've spent too much time outlining, you're going to waste a lot of that energy, because everything's going to have to shift over a little bit, or that subway stop happened to be closed. Now what are we going to do? And that kind of thing you have to be able to roll with.
Yeah, I think you need to leave some room to have surprises with the writing, because I have written these incredibly detailed outlines, and they were brilliant. They were going to be the best story ever, and at the end I'm so exhausted, and I feel like, well, I don't need to write the story. I feel like I've already written it, so I have no motivation to do it.
There's so many moments where you're like, this is it. This is absolutely the best I can do. This is exactly how it's going to go, and this is going to work. And then you go to sleep, and you wake up, and you look at it, and you're like, what was I thinking? And so then you have to like scrap and be able to, you have to be open with yourself and say, okay, it's worth the effort of redoing this because I see a better way. And but you can also edit to death. So it's that balance of knowing that there's always room for improvement, but at some point you call it. Yes, Sayla. I have not planted her in the audience for this, I promise. She's asking how many books I've written. So I've written 3 books for adults and 2 for children.
And I have written 2 for children. Hopefully there will be more.
And what would you say the age range is for your children's books? Like, what do you think is the prime age that pique their interest and would be the proper reading level?
Gertie and Lions and Liars are both for 8 to 12, but my dad has read both, and he is much older than that, and he loved them. So there's no limit.
Yeah. And mine are the same age range as well. Yes. So the question is, do we have other people read our writing before it's published? For me, I usually don't. I have a really great relationship with, well, I do give it to my agent, so she'll read it beforehand, and then my editor as well. And I have a really wonderful relationship with my editor, so when she doesn't like the way something's going, she'll give me that feedback. She helps me kind of, redirect a little bit. But I usually don't open it up to too many other people. The more opinions you get, sometimes it gets even more complicated. But it is good if you can have like 1 to 2 reliable voices who can give you some hard feedback and not just tell you, I absolutely love everything you do, no matter what it is.
My sister reads my book every step of the way and has a big impact on the book. I also give it to my agent and my editor as well. So those are the 3 main people. And my parents will read the book before it comes out just to, I don't know, I want them to read it and know what's going to be out there before it's actually on the shelf. I think those are the only people who read it. Yep. Are there any aspiring writers here? Authors? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Ah.
Frodo is the best name for a dog.
Oh,
He found it. Does that just say anybody's married to anybody, doesn't have a date, it just says 24 Jericho.
There you go. See, inspiration comes in surprising places. All right, well, thanks, everyone.
Thank you for braving the rain.